Let me quickly tell you a little bit about the amazing Bill McDonough. He first kind of came to prominence, I think, or fame when he was one of the world's leading environmentally focused architects and did things like put a green roof on the Ford River Rouge plant, working with Bill Ford personally. And that was an amazing project quite a while ago. He really changed his sort of whole position in the zeitgeist, I think, when he published a book in 2002 called Cradle to Cradle, Rethinking the Way We Make Things. And that cradle to cradle phrase is going to come up quite a bit in his presentation, I think. Now he's doing 3 different businesses. One is McDonough Innovation, which is an advisory group that works with companies and also governments. William McDonough and Partners, which is his architecture practice, and MBDC, which is a certification organization to help products determine whether or not they are cradle to cradle compliant. And it was the work with MBDC in large part that led to a very recent important partnership that Bill has done with Amazon, which I think he's going to tell us a little bit about. There's well more I could say, but I'm going to turn it over to Bill and his slides now. Bill, take it away.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. I thought I'd start as a designer by reflecting on the fact that I was born in Japan in 1951. And as a child, I wondered what I was doing in Japan as an American child. And my parents were there because they were waging peace. They had been trained by MacArthur as part of 200 young American couples to come into Japan after the treaty was signed, wearing civilian clothing, unmarked jeeps, no weapons, no paperwork, and to go wage peace. And so they traveled all over Japan and made friends. And when you think about what happens when we have the kind of destruction we saw with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the notion of absolute surrender, and then you come in wearing civilian clothing, waging peace, became an important idea. And for me, the idea of waging peace through commerce by design became, for me, an important idea. Because while we can talk about a lot of policies and things like that, they're very important. I found that actually engaging with people on a commercial level and actually executing against these things is a very effective way to make this go quickly. And commerce is, I think, the quickest engine of change. So I wanted to talk about that. I'm going to go to the next slide. So I want to talk about design as the first signal of human intention. That's what it is. You wake up in the morning with intentions. And I come here now from Charlottesville, Virginia, where we've had a very interesting history of revolution, of slavery, of the recent events of a couple summers ago with the white supremacists marching in this place, the lawn of Thomas Jefferson's academical village. And for 5 years, I was the dean of the architecture school here in the 90s and lived in the house on the lower left, Pavilion 9. And I got to know this site very well because I would walk through here on my way to the university, to the School of Architecture every morning. And what you see Mr. Jefferson doing here is at the top is the rotunda. This is Plato. These are Platonic forms. And Plato had an academy. And it's the search for truth in the humanities and meaning and the beautiful, the ugly, the right, the wrong, the moral, the immoral. And then you see these 10 pavilions, Greco-Roman, running down the 2 colonnades. This is Aristotle. This is the Lyceum. This is the search for truth in science and in number. And when you start to realize that what we're looking at here is an expression of values, actually, and that if we articulate this as a framework, we realize that what we're seeing here is you start with your values. What do you believe is right and wrong? What is beautiful? And you move to principles, and then to visions, then to goals, then to strategies, then to tactics, then to metrics, and then you do value creation. And for a business and a commercial enterprise, imagine that is the chain of events. You start with values and you move to value. Because what has happened is often today, we see people starting with value, and then they move up from a quantifications, and they do goals that are benchmarking, and they're based on number. So you often get things like, I'm going to be 25% less bad than something, that kind of thing. And it becomes, the goal becomes a numerical relationship. But if you start with the right and the wrong, you start looking at the qualification, and then you look to bedrock principles and visions and goals. And this is where I work. And we produce the value, but we start with our values. So the question I like to start with when I'm designing is, how do we love all the children of all species for all time? If we start with that question, it's astonishing how many knotty problems unravel based on this simple question. And so as we develop buildings, landscapes, I design buildings like trees. They're renewably powered. I want materials to be safe and healthy. So that's how we do that. So the question becomes, how do we make the world better because we're here? When I design a building like a tree, it's not zero emissions, it's positive emissions. Trees emit oxygen, bird song. They accrue solar energy as fuel, food. They distill water. They change colors with the seasons, create microclimates. So how do I design things so that the world gets better because we're here by design? We want more of what we do, not less. So in 1991, preparing for the Earth Summit, I created this diagram looking at the issues of the social and market economy across the bottom. And that in 1992, we were going to come to Rio and we're going to talk about what happens when you bring in the environment. And if we realize that the bottom left could be social, the bottom right could be market, and we were in a world of a social market economy, and that the socialism didn't necessarily yield a great environment, because Russia had been declared 16% uninhabitable, ecocide, thanks to Chernobyl and Baku and so on. And then on the capital side, the market side, capitalists, they take the fish, and take the trees and, forget the fish. So if we look at the environment, if that became an ism, like socialism or capitalism, environmentalism, it would be too extreme as well. So really, we're here to bring all these together now. And so I created this fractal tool, which is, instead of a Venn diagram, it's more detailed. So we can actually go in and look at it. I'm now developing it as an ESG tool with our clients. And so you look at this and say, fine, I can run around this and start to ask questions and answer them and look at my intentions. So if I go to the lower right corner, the economy corner, and I start in the economy corner of the economy corner, I can ask the question, what is that question? It would be, can I make it and sell it at a profit? And if your answer to that is no, then don't do it, because you're not here to help us. That's the requirement of that corner. But then as we move toward equity, it would be, are people being paid a living wage? Or we move toward environment, are we being eco-efficient? Are we doing as little damage as we possibly can? And so on, as we do our business. And as you'll see, I like looking at being more good instead of simply less bad. And so as we move across, we realize that the economy corner of fairness would be, are men and women paid the same for the same work? The equity corner would be racism, sexism, nothing to do with environment, nothing to do with money. This is dignity and grace and fairness. And then we have the environment and fairness, and say, is it fair to put people in toxic work environments or make products that are poisonous? Is that fair? And then we move into the environment and we can say, is it fair to leave behind an environment to our children with polluted rivers, and toxic conditions, and a climate change, and so on? Is that fair? And then we go to environment at the top. And this is, am I following the laws of nature while I do my work? And as an architect, I must follow the law of gravity. It's not just a good idea, it's a law. What other laws does nature have it would like us to follow? And then here, a very important one, which is the economy corner of environment. This is, am I doing business while following the laws of nature? This would be eco-effectiveness. instead of eco-efficiency. Do the right thing first and then do it the right way. And so we realize that when you look at this and you get it all together, that 100 is really ESG perfect. And so we realize that what's happened is people talk about the triple bottom line, and that's nice, but it's the bottom line, it's profit, and it's what managers do. And so the circular economy is often just the triple bottom line. It's like, can I be more efficient as I do all these things? And it's worthy because it minimizes risk and it works across the sectors. But even more exciting, I think, are the companies now that are dealing with the whole thing. And I call this triple top line. And this is the executive job of all of us. And our job is to optimize growth, revenue, public good, health, we're talking about today, and then give it to the managers to manage it to profit. Because as Drucker said, it's a manager's job to be efficient and do something the right way, but the executive's job to be effective and do the right thing. Just to think about it, if a manager is managing the right way and with Six Sigma perfection, but they're doing the wrong thing, they become perfectly wrong. So that's the idea. So see, what would be the good instead of the less bad? And so let's have good materials. Let's have good economy. It would be circular, sharing and shared, but we have to have good materials first, because a circular economy of bads and toxic things, like a lot of the clothing we're looking at right now, isn't a good thing. It's retoxification. So circular just means, again, it doesn't have a qualification. It's a quantification. And then we have good energy. Let's use 100% renewable. Good water, clean, available to all children, every day, everywhere. That's a good intention. And then good lives. So this is cradle to cradle framework that we use for all the products, and we have certification program for them. But the thing that, and this is what Amazon has picked up. And the idea, though, these 5 conditions at the top are all predicates to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So as the companies and communities we work with want to do the Sustainable Development Goals, we can gird underneath it with these fundamental issues of quality that we can then add to these other specific interests of concern and look for optimizations and how they can be cross-referenced and help people everywhere. So Amazon, by selecting Cradle to Cradle Certified, is something to call out, and partner with the institute that I created. It's very exciting, and it really makes a difference, because people now realize this is something worthy of a little bit of attention anyway. So that was a nice thing to happen. So I'll finish with this. This year I opened the G20 in March in Riyadh with on the energy and climate tracks, and I spoke 4 keynotes in technology and policy in both sectors, energy and climate. And we developed a strategy for how to deal with carbon as a special thing, because it's both a material and a fuel. And so this is from 2005. I started looking at what it meant to look at biological nutrients and and technical, and think about whole cities that do this. So we're here to really recarbonize the biosphere and decarbonize the atmosphere. We're not here to decarbonize. You can't decarbonize yourself. You'd have to shoot yourself, dry up, and blow away, because we're carbon. Life is carbon. So this idea of actually articulating how we're going to use carbon and how to characterize it has become something that I've been focused on for quite a bit. So that just brings us up to some of the present work.
Yeah, you have beautiful language, Bill, for explaining all this stuff. So thank you for working so hard to articulate it and symbolize it with those beautiful charts also. I'm struck by several things. One, you're working with the G20. So obviously one of the key issues there is Paris Climate Accords, getting carbon out of the atmosphere. How would, and of course I would just take for granted the US showed no interest at that meeting. But aside from that, and with the presumption that that will change at the next G20, how would you characterize the way the G20 is looking at climate based on your work with them?
It was a real eye-opening experience, because I had an invitation to stay through all the discussions, which I did as much as I could. So I got to, and virtual was interesting because you could actually hear everybody clearly. And to hear 24 countries, because it was top 20 plus 4, and they're articulating their ambitions and goals, what you realize over time as you listen is that we all have the same goal, all of us. And the conversations would evolve into, well, here's what I don't like about the way you're doing it, or here's how I think we're going to do it, contradiction and whatever. And there was a lot of that kind of talking about where our aim is zero, emissions, and we're going to be net zero. And then you have to talk about what is the meaning of net, and you end up with all these definitions that everybody's trying to figure out what the words are for everything. But the bottom line was, we all want the same thing. We all want the climate to be coherently dealt with and the carbon to be coherently dealt with. And we're going to have to get there as fast as we can. And a lot of the goals are set for 2050 because of the Paris goals and so on. But in the end, everybody was shooting for that. The Chinese announced, 2060 for net zero emissions. The Europeans and Germans announced 2050. I think UK announced 2040 and so on. But this idea that that is a common goal. So what I saw coming out of it, and by the way, they did endorse our proposal for a circular carbon economy, which looks at it as assets that get managed and we all do things together, and we can all use as many tools as we can bring to the party, depending on who we are and what we can do. But the fundamentals are, we've got to recarbonize the biosphere with nature-based solutions first, because it's really, obviously, the more we can do to restore natural systems, the better. The multiplier effects are immense on ecosystem restoration and regenerative agriculture. I mean, even whales play a giant part of this. It's quite surprising when you think about decimating the whales for their oil in the last century, and now they're back. I mean, the beauty of the imagination that an atom of carbon that's in the atmosphere from burning whale oil in Philadelphia 100 years ago to light the streets is now in a whale again. Wow. This whole notion of restoring planetary health is critical. But when we see the carbon fluxes involved, the emissions are immense. It's probably around 50 gigatons a year from humans. And we can see that in the next 10 years, we have to get that down by 60% in order to start to level out so we can achieve these Paris goals. So once everybody starts to see that together, they go, oh, what's your part in that story? And how the question is no longer what's wrong with the way you're doing it. It becomes, how can I help you? What can we do to help you? Because we have the same goal. So the countries were fascinating, and the US, which was there, also agreed to this. And so it's a chance to look at the ambition not as hollow with all these words and ideas, but as vessels ready to be filled with the generosity of sharing together. That's how to see them, not empty, but waiting to be filled.
Okay, so that you've seen governments' willingness and interest and changing rapidly, and thank you for your work in helping to convince them of that. But you're talking about waging peace with commerce, right? So let's talk about the commerce piece. And how are you looking at or finding through your work with clients and other companies you observe in the economy, including Amazon, which somebody just asked about in the chat? Do you see a fundamental shift happening that business really wants to use commerce to address, let's take particularly climate and putting carbon where it belongs?
I think you see particularly, when you think about the announcement of Microsoft, that they want to go after all the carbon that they put in the atmosphere since the beginning of the enterprise. Think about that statement. And then take a look at kinds of things that Bill Gates invested in, for example, like carbon capture, which is contested by a lot of people as being something that's pie in the sky, is expensive and probably not very practical or who knows what. But it is critical when you calculate the amount that nature can actually do, the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere fugitive that we really have as an overburden, and then what are we going to do about it? So we can do the efficiency and we can do the reductions, and we can move from carbon-based energy to non-carbon, and we see renewables coming fast and the prices way down. It's fantastic. In these desert countries, we're seeing 1.74 cents a kilowatt hour. I mean, we're really the really cost-effective renewables. And then the question becomes, how do we move them around to everyone's benefit? And just an example of a commercial opportunity we're seeing at the beginning of right now. They're sending hydrogen. First, it'll be what we call blue hydrogen, created by natural gas, but then carbon captured. So it's still carbon neutral. But the hydrogen being made into ammonia is a liquid we can transport and being sent to Japan. Japan wants to go hydrogen. So does Korea. So all of a sudden, where are they going to get it? Where are the renewables? They're not that active in geothermal because they're worried about earthquakes and so on. And the nuclear in Japan has been an interesting experiment. So the idea that we can actually ship hydrogen as a carrier, since it's not an energy source, it's a carrier, we can carry renewable power from these desert sites that have wind. We have Northwest Australia, we have Middle East, we have North Africa, and we can send renewables long distances to other countries. That's amazing.
And that's a good business, right? You think that's a big business. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, you could literally go to Northern Europe and say to Germany, why don't you give us an order since you're going hydrogen and you need hydrogen to run your steel mills and all these large thermal loads. What if you buy $2 billion for the hydrogen from us and we buy $2 billion worth of electrolyzers from you? Because you could make equipment that we need to make your hydrogen. And all of a sudden, the countries are exchanging purchase orders. And guess what? We're going zero emissions and they're getting zero emissions and we're getting a new industry. And all of a sudden we move away from the ones we don't want and move into what we do want by commerce itself.
How soon do you think that kind of thing could be an actual business? Moving solar energy through ammonia to other parts of the world?
I think as soon as we see electrolyzers come online at scale, I would say it's within a year.
So just to finish the response to my question, do you see a sea change beginning to happen, at least among businesses, and particularly big businesses, that they want to get into these kinds of businesses in order to not just make money, but actually, as you would say, wage peace with commerce?
Yes. I think when the opportunity is clear, that's why when you look at that lower right corner of the triangle, I think the fact that they can make money doing it is by definition what they have to do as commerce, right? So that's a predicate. So once you see that, whether they're doing it because it means something to them or they really care about the environment, this, that, and the other thing, all those things we do care about, and they bring things to the table. And they allow policy to align, and they allow people to get excited, and they allow us to get to work. But the fundamentals are the economics have arrived, and that's why we will see this go quickly.
Okay, cool. I think we have a question from the audience. Okay, yes, here we got a question. Please, Reza, go ahead. Identify yourself too.
Yeah, Reza Jafari. I was the chairman of the ITU Telecom at the time that we were developing SDGs. The Sustainable Development Goals bill. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Again, as David said, as you can see, the goal number 17 is the partnership of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I was wondering whether you can comment on how we can promote the creation of the G20 ecosystem. And again, as you said, creating mechanisms of trade and commerce and exchange for the benefit of all of us in the circular carbon in terms of being able to share the resources and to share the benefits. Thank you.
It is the question. This is something that only can be done if we do it together. That's the point. And so it is the great question of partnering. And I think each country and each region and each enterprise can start to think, how can they offer up what they do best into that system so that we can start sharing that information? And I think it'll be quite quick. So that's why I think commerce will help, because policies are important, but if we have to wait for policy, we're going to miss opportunity. And as we see in various innovations, and we need such a desperately vigorous set of innovations in climate related, for example, and I think in toxins and all the rest of it, but that the process is really quite fun to watch. You know, if you take a look at someone like Elon Musk or any of us innovating in these spaces, we start with a kind of inspiration, like, oh, I think we should do buildings like trees, or I think we should have electric cars, whatever. These are inspirations we can all have. And then you move from there to sort of execution. So we're now seeing the execution of solar and so on and so forth. And they're getting to scale. Solar certainly is at scale. And it was a rough, rocky road. It took a long time. It took, it took energy incentives in Germany that stimulated the Chinese to come in and take that market and then go to scale. And then we have whatever, but it got to scale and here we are. So that's execution. And once you can execute something, then you can realize that for the policymakers, you can give over your standard into the public domain. When Elon Musk gave away his patents, what was he doing? He was becoming a standard. When we do our textiles that are so clean, you could eat them, then the regulators and policy people look at it and go, wait a minute, look at that cradle to cradle standard. Well, if they can do it, then anybody can do it. Good. So that can become a policy. And they can say, we want recycled content, we want this, that. And then from policy, after 10 years, you end up with regulation because it's possible. And we want everybody to recognize this ability to increase our quality of life. So it takes years. That might be a 30, 40-year program. We don't have it. We're at 2020. We got to get this done by 2050. We got 30 years. We got to go. We got to go fast. So what we want is the great behaviors that are part of the story. And that's why I did a diagram. You'll see it in the Nature journal in mid-January. I did a diagram of this so people have a tool and they can look at it and go, oh, my part is here, 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 here. And these are all the things we can do. So if you want to know about how to plant mangroves at scale, which are astonishingly good carbon absorbers, as well as nurseries for fish and barriers for wave actions that we don't want. So yeah, we have immensely good tools to share for everybody about how to do that. Great. And then we just keep going. Like, who's got what? That's what we have to do. Let's all get together.
Thank you so much, Bill. We have to wrap it up. I wanted to say two things. One, I'm so pleased that you put the Sustainable Development Goals in your slides. It's deeply meaningful, and we have to keep highlighting those at every possible opportunity. And it's very techonomic in our view of you to have done so. And that's one reason we wanted you. And also, I was just looking over the many questions I had wanted to ask you that we, technically speaking, haven't gotten to. And then I realized you actually answered most of them in your extremely good slide presentation at the outset. So thank you so much for joining us. I know you're super busy. It's one of those virtues of a virtual event that we could have you. So I hope we'll see you again and stay in close touch. Thank you so much for your presentation and for talk.
Thank you, David. And I thank everyone for their time.